All right, I'm going to go on my Clemson soapbox a little bit after this embarrassing loss for Clemson this past weekend against Georgia. What does this mean for Clemson? What does this loss mean for Clemson? I think for this season, I think just means that their ceiling is a little lower than they had hoped. They still can win the ACC. They still can compete in their conference. They still can get to the playoff. But I think even best case scenario, they win the ACC and they get a playoff berth. We know what their ceiling is. As if they face a team like Georgia and if they face a team like Ohio State or an Alabama or whoever's up there, they're not getting past them with this team. So I think in the short term they can still win the conference, but that's really about it. Moving forward, I think this loss sets them back a little more than people may have realized. I said before this week, I think this is a program redefining loss. This sets them back from the elite. Now, I think people can say, like, hey, this has been trending this way for a few years, and it's hard to argue that, but I still, up until this past Saturday against Georgia, considered them as one of the elites of the sport, because they recruited at a top 10 level and they have a fantastic roster and they win games. So this last year was the first year they didn't win double digit games in like 12 years. So they're still a fantastic program and a fantastic team. But I think this game versus Georgia showed that there is a separation of class. And this was a class that Clemson used to be in. They were now measured against the top of the sport in Georgia, and they just got handled. And you can say, yeah, it was close for a half. Like they maybe had like one or two snaps past the 50-yard line in the first half. Like this was an embarrassing performance offensively. Defense, they look great, but I'm really trying to focus on where they're measuring up against the elites of college football, and they're just not there anymore. We need to readjust where Clemson is. They should not be measured against the elites of college football anymore. They had a fantastic run. They had a few natties. They had arguably the best 3 or 4 year stretch, in recent history, even right up there with Bama, having 2 natties in 3 years. But those days are long gone, and Clemson can't be considered amongst the elites anymore. And I think also what this loss will do is this is going to hurt them in recruiting. They're already in the ACC. They have to compete against the Big Ten and the SEC selling against the ACC. They go to recruits and they'll essentially just be like, oh, do you want to play in the ACC? Or do you want to come to the SEC or the Big Ten? Like just the conferences in and of itself. Not even going to get to the money yet. Just the conferences in and of itself. Do you want to be in the ACC or do you want to be in the Big Ten and the SEC? Where things are heading, Clemson is at a massive disadvantage right now, and this was a prove-it game for them. They got this win. That I'd be preaching a different story, but they got blown out. So when they're going up against recruits against Georgia and Bama and Ohio State and Oregon and all these guys, those recruits are looking at that game being like, man, Clemson ain't in anymore. So I think they're going to lose a recruiting edge. And I think they really need to bolster their recruiting. Obviously, they recruit at a top 10 level out of high school, which is great, but they're not even close to what Georgia is doing. And this is really a defensive-led program. Like their top 5 recruits, 1 through 5 for the 2025 class, are all defense. And defense isn't where they need help right now. They need help on offense. So I think that will really hurt them moving forward in recruiting. And, just touched on it too. But the ACC is just getting left behind. Like their revenue sharing, the schools can't compete with the SEC and the Big Ten. And that's why they're suing to get out, because they know it. So this was just a really unfortunate loss for Clemson at this time, because it's really going to hurt them, I think, in the near future. Now, I also wanted to talk about some of the commentary and things that were said that just sounded so silly to me. After this game, like one of the common ones was Georgia does this to everybody. This is the whole crux of my argument here. Yeah, they do, but Clemson usually is not considered to be the everyone. Clemson is the two-time national champion in a 3-year span, getting to 4 natties, like 6 straight playoff appearances. Like Clemson's not everyone here. Are we just lowering the standards for Clemson? I think right now, I think we are. But the whole notion of Georgia does this to everyone is the point I'm trying to make. They do that to everyone, but Clemson used to do that to everyone. Like, they shouldn't be doing this to Clemson. They're just now in a tier below where they used to be. So, I think that's going to be a hard one to swallow. Another one that came up a lot, they got to use the portal. Now, look, I don't think that if they used the portal, they would have won this game necessarily, but maybe. But at the very least, it would have been more competitive. Like, especially, not even just this year. What about the past 3 years? What if they had these transfer guys that are now in year 2 or in year 3 who have really been in the program and now set out to be studs? Like, second-year portal guys tend to be very successful. And, like, who knows? What if they did use the portal, they got a Cam Ward? Like, what would that have changed? What if last year they had Keon Coleman? Like, that Florida State game last year would have been different. And the season probably would have been different if they had Keon Coleman. So, I mean, yes, you absolutely need to be using the portal here. It's crazy that they're still not doing this. So, and another one that came up, Clemson can still win the ACC and be a playoff team. Yep, I totally agree. If is that the standard now for Clemson? If it is, then that's great. That's where I think they really are right now, realistically. But that hasn't been their standard as of recent. So, even if they win the ACC, their ceiling is like, I don't think they'll get a playoff win, and they're certainly not winning the Natty. Like, their ceiling used to be the Natty, and their standard was not win the ACC. It was go win the Natty. So also another one that came up, the Clemson graduation rate versus Georgia. Like, this one is so silly to me. Like, who gives a shit? Like, Clemson fans, would you, if their graduation rate, I think is like 99%, which is fantastic, stellar. You never want that to like drop. But would you take a natty if it dropped from 99% to 89%? Yes. Like, are you really clamoring that hard for this fucking graduation rate? Like, give me a break here. So, I don't know. I think if Dabo wants to keep competing for ACC championships, then continue what you're doing. Like, also, these are the same ACC championships that not so long ago that were a foregone conclusion for Clemson winning before the first snap of the season even started. So if you want to get back to the pinnacle of the sport and be amongst the elites, you need to focus on building out your offensive line, which has been a problem for Clemson for quite some time now. Evaluate and develop talent better than they have been. That used to be their bread and butter. They used to be amazing at it. Michigan is now probably the standard for that. And you need to use the portal as a weapon instead of just a threat of people leaving from your roster. Otherwise, you're going to quickly fall back into mediocrity. So, anyway, I still think they have a shot to win the ACC, but that's pretty much their ceiling here. Follow Big Body Ball on all socials. You can check out the full video on YouTube.